Welcome to the National Women's Fitness Academy podcast. We're here to talk about women's health, female hormones, body image, and all things health and fitness.
Hello, girls, and welcome back to another episode of the Women's Fitness Academy's podcast. I'm your host, Siggy, one of the WFA's educators and a women's body and health coach. Today, I'm chatting with the awesome Cory Ruth. And for those who don't know Cory, she is a registered dietitian and a women's health expert who is here pretty much to tell you that if you have PCOS and experience certain hormone imbalances, there is no need to be overwhelmed because she knows how you're feeling. She's been there, she's done through it all, and she's here to tell you that there's a better way to heal without restrictive diets and avoiding the foods that you love. Cory has dedicated pretty much her whole life's work to learning everything she possibly could about these complex conditions and empowering women to take back the control of their health. As well as she's been featured in Women's Health Magazine, Yahoo, Livestrong.com, and so many more. Cory, I would love us to start the conversation where what was life for you before you were able to manage your PCOS?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have, ever since I went through puberty, I have had irregular periods. And I remember being in the bathroom or the locker room, probably both, in high school, listening to my girlfriends talking about how, my period's coming on Friday. I don't want it to come. Blah, blah. And I'm like, wow, how do you know that? Like you just know your period's coming. They're like, well, yeah, I usually get it around, blah, 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 blah day. And I was just baffled by that. I could not understand why my periods were just sneak attacks, like completely random, no clear pattern, was never on that typical, 28-day cycle stuff that we learn about in our textbooks. So I was just so confused. And I remember feeling, we talk a lot about the mood component of PCOS, anxiety and depression. I just remember feeling like I was alone. I felt like a freak, right? Like I felt like I was so different than everybody else. Nobody understood what I was going through. And because of that, all of those hormonal issues, and because I didn't have any set schedule as far as menstruation or my period went, it was like my moods were all over the place. My energy levels were all over the place and unpredictable. And I felt like a foreigner in my own body. And as I got older, things never improved because I didn't fully understand what was happening. And I had never even heard of PCOS. I didn't get a formal diagnosis until my 20s, but I always kind of had an idea once I learned what it was. So I started to really dig deep into, what are the strategies to combat PCOS, because I don't want to just take the pill. If you want to take the pill, have at it, totally okay. But for me personally, I did not like the way that the pill made me feel. I did not like the way that the pill made me personally have crazy high appetite and blood sugar swings. And I gained a ton of weight. My moods were all over the place. So I just didn't personally want to take the pill. So I was thinking, okay, what are some other strategies? Because pretty much when you go to the doctor, that's all you're given, right? You're given a prescription for the pill. You're told to lose weight or come back when you want to get pregnant, right? That's like the classic answer. So I was like, there has to be something more. What can I do to help myself? So as I got into it, I started to understand the connection between nutrition and diet and PCOS. I had already been on my way to becoming a registered dietitian. And so I kind of realized, maybe I'm the perfect person to step into this space and learn and educate because of that huge connection. And here I am, somebody who also has PCOS and has had more than my fair share of struggles. So it was kind of the marriage of all of those things. And out of that, was born this beautiful, wonderful career that I have been able to be to kind of, spearhead in the PCOS world as far as teaching women how to eat, how to make certain, lifestyle changes to support their hormone health and really improve and make strides when it comes to their PCOS outside of a, traditional doctor's office setting.
It's so fascinating to hear everyone's story around PCOS, and I can relate to the struggle of not knowing when your period's going to come, and then it just like hits you, and you're like, "Whoa! Like, where did this rush come from?"
Right. And I wore white pants today of all days. Why?
Now,
Uh-huh.
speaking of white pants, has that ever happened to you where there was an accident? And you're like, "Holy shit! What did I just do?"
Uh-huh. Oh yeah. Yeah. And maybe it wasn't white pants in particular, but yeah, definitely has happened. And yeah, the nighttime sneak attacks, the worst. Yes. With white sheets. Yeah.
Yeah, the worst.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Like ruined another one. All right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
oh my God. I tell you what, the amount of sheets that I've ruined, yeah. RIP,
Yeah.
like, yeah. No, let's not go
I
there.
know. I know, right? I don't want to know the dollar amount on that. Yeah.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
So after doing
Hmm.
all of that research around, the symptoms that you were experiencing, what was that pivot moment for you going, I can manage my PCOS a little bit better now?
Sure. So understanding the connection to blood sugar balance
Mm.
when it comes to diet and stress.
Yes.
Those two things are always things that we look at and address.
Mm.
I talked about this at a podcast last week, but we hear a lot about the types of PCOS, and I really try to let women know that you don't focus too much on your PCOS type because at the end of the day, number one, labels are for jars. And number two, the treatment protocol is largely the same. So,
Mm.
whether or not you are somebody who deals with elevated testosterone or androgens and you have facial hair, if you don't struggle with weight issues whatsoever, and you actually might want to gain weight,
Mm.
if you have insulin resistance, no matter what's going on with your PCOS and what's driving it, you have to address, understand, and implement when it comes to blood sugar balance, how to do this and how to carry this out effectively, because that is paramount. There's such a huge connection between what our blood sugar is doing and how our hormones, our reproductive hormones, and our cortisol even is showing up and how those are functioning, whether that means they're regulated or they're completely dysregulated. So blood sugar balance is huge. And the stress connection is so real, especially if you are somebody who has any kind of adrenal dysfunction, like you have any kind of adrenal health issues, stress, cortisol elevations. That stress connection is so huge when it comes to combating PCOS and realizing what our triggers are and what's making this condition flare. So those are things that I really think all women with PCOS need to consider and look at and figure out how to fix and work on. And that's where I come in. I say like, figure out how to fix it, but that's not giving you any concrete advice. But that's where, specialists who understand and work in this condition can really help guide you as far as what the different areas are that you need to focus on and prioritize.
It's so true because when I was first diagnosed with PCOS, it wasn't because of blood sugar or insulin, but it was more the androgen side of things.
Yes.
And yes, like experiencing
Yep.
like the imbalance of hormones, a bit of facial hair, but no one really spoke about the importance of nutrition till I, did more of my research. And I love the fact that you've mentioned that is the number one priority. Doesn't matter
Yes.
what type of PCOS it is.
Right. Yes, exactly. And I'll tell you really quickly too, fun fact tidbit, when our blood sugar is not as balanced as it should be in women with PCOS, that sends messages down to our ovaries to pump out more androgens, like testosterone. So that's a very concise way, obviously, layman terms, but simplified way of looking at it. But that's really that connection between what's on your plate, what you're eating, how you're eating, and what's happening. You don't think about what I ate for dinner and the facial hair that pops up the next day. It's not that quick. That's way oversimplifying it. But you see what I mean? We don't always think about that, right? So that's the huge tie. And that's how we can make improvements in our PCOS symptoms just by focusing on our diet and what we're eating.
I love that. And balancing blood sugar, I know a big one for women as well is not eating enough protein. What are some things that you've seen?
Oh yeah. So at least here in the US, and it might be similar wherever, wherever the listeners are in the world or where you are. Here in the US, I can speak to that mostly. We live in a very kind of carb-centric food society, food
Yeah.
culture, right? Like my example I always talk about is, we go to a restaurant, we get chips or breadsticks as an appetizer. That's very like standard here, or rolls. And then maybe we get pasta with like a little bit of veggie, maybe a little bit of protein, if any. We get our cocktail, we get maybe our salad with our croutons, which is another carb. Then we get dessert, which is a carb. Then maybe we have a drink later, that's a carb. So it's like carb, 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 carb. And we're really not emphasizing and prioritizing protein, fat, and fiber. Those are the nutrients that are helpful for blood sugar balance. And this isn't to say cut all carbs, right? That's not what this means. But if we focus on limiting our carbs a little bit and really, prioritizing those other nutrients, we can see our blood sugar be in a much, much happier place. We feel fuller for longer, meaning we're not as snacky. We have less cravings. So that all plays into this weight piece, which is huge with PCOS too. And that can help us just with weight management alone, right? Making sure that we feel satiated and feel like full and satisfied after a meal. It's hard to do that when we are eating so many empty carbs and processed carbs, and we're not really focusing on the other things that are important. So that's a huge one. Protein is very key. There's no like one set number to eat as far as your protein goals go, because it varies per person. And I think that's such a disconnect, with what we see online or on social media. Oh, so-and-so said I need at least blank grams of protein per meal. Sure, but that's not going to apply to everybody. So if you can find out how many grams of protein, carbs, fat, and fiber work best for your body, and that's what I like to teach, you will have such a better understanding of what's going to improve your PCOS and your symptoms, including weight gain, or hirsutism, or, irregular periods, whatever you're struggling with. So just by understanding what your macro composition and even calorie count, should look like, can go such a long way as far as helping to guide us in our diet. So I hope that answers that question, but it totally can vary per person.
Yeah, 100%. And I totally agree with that, because for so many years, I thought I was doing the right thing by eating certain foods, but totally neglecting of the protein part and not realizing how heavily carb focused we are. And also another part of that, I wasn't eating enough fats. And I know fats is very important for women.
Totally. Yes. Yeah. I know we went through, we kind of skipped this, but I know at least like my mom's generation and even my sisters who are much older than I went through the whole 90s, like low fat, no fat craze. And that would be, just thinking about that now, that would be so hard. That would be so detrimental for so many of us with PCOS. Our sex hormones are literally built from cholesterol. So anyone preaching low fat, no fat, I barely see anybody doing that these days, thank God. But, run, because we need fats, and we need some saturated fats too. We talk about, cut out red meat, but we still need some saturated fats too. It's all about a balance.
Yeah, definitely. God, I remember the years of like following my mum's no fat diet, or her watching her buy, low fat yogurts in the supermarket, and I'm thinking, oh, that's the way to go about it. But then realized for so many years I was literally making a really bad choice for my body.
Yeah, totally. Especially if you're, pairing that with like exercising a lot and being really active, or under eating or under fueling. You just have a recipe for like hormonal disaster.
Yes. Oh my God. So true. And referring back to the under fueling and over exercising, we know it's a big factor for stress as well. And that is
right.
helpful for PCOS, as you mentioned before. It's like comes down to nutrition, but also stress. And I'm sure you see many, many women and clients who are over exercising, are not nourished enough, and then they have all these
Oh,
like
yeah.
crazy symptoms. So like what are some things that have helped you or you've noticed women change over time to help their stress levels?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get asked that a lot. And honestly, so again, I know this is like the world's worst answer, but it's so true. It really varies per person,
Yeah.
right? Like one thing that brings peace and serenity to one person can cause the other one stress.
Yeah.
So I think it's really about figuring out what works best for you. 99% of the time when I ask a client, what's your self-care and stress reduction routine? It's crickets, right? We don't have one because we're too busy. We've got life happening at full speed. So if that's you, that is a very clear indication that you've got to get something like that in place because we have to create a buffer system. We cannot eliminate stress, right? It's going to keep happening. What we can do, what we do have the ability to change is how our body responds to that stress and those stressors. And if we have that buffer system, if we create that resiliency, we're really able to function so much better. And that means happier hormones and happier, better PCOS symptoms for most of us. So it can totally vary. Some of the common ones I like to toss out are obviously ones that resonate with me because I've seen a lot of great traction in myself, but also I've seen lots of other things work for different women. But I'll just give a few examples. Nature. Nature can be so healing and so calming, especially, a lot of us, we work indoors, we live our lives indoors. So we forget how comforting and how calming nature can be. So hiking outside, walks outside, singing, crying, a lot of us just need to get that release, whether that can come from singing or crying, grounding, stretching, deep breathing. All of these things are so great. We forget about exercise too and how much of a mood booster and a calming system exercise and intentional movement can be. Just working on back to blood sugar, just working on diet. Actually, when our blood sugar is not as balanced, just like I mentioned with the androgen production, as it could be, should be, it's a stressor on the body. The body has to work overtime to correct it. So just by working on balancing your blood sugar, it's a twofer because you're also impacting your cortisol, which is your stress hormone levels. So the two can totally go hand in hand there. And then also, of course, working on sleep and supplements can be very helpful, obviously, depending on which one. But I make a supplement called the Cortisol Calmer. And it's such an excellent, it's kind of got this cult following now. It's such an excellent blend that helps with sleep and stress and anxiety and mood, irritability, all of those things together. It's an excellent one. And you can supplement too. Supplements are not the end all be all, right? They're just one piece of the puzzle. But for some of us who just need that extra nudge, they can be so supportive. I also love magnesium. So those two can be great as well.
Yeah, I love magnesium is like my best friend.
Yeah, me too. Right. I think we should make shirts that say that, like magnesium is my BFF.
Definitely. And, too often women are so stressed out these days because of whether they're taking care of their families, themselves, their work. It's just like we're in a very like high functioning modern space where with stress, it depletes our magnesium by a lot. And I think a lot of women don't realize the effect it does that. But you also mentioned a really good point where people don't have a downtime routine or a self-care routine because they're busy. But I've also found around a lot of my clients and women in general that they feel guilty taking time for themselves.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yes, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. There's like this total, and I've been there too, this total girl boss hustle culture, right? That so many of us have bought into and it's true. Yeah, we feel, and it honestly, like now having two little kids, it's even harder. We have mom guilt on top of that. So yeah, I definitely can understand that. And it's so very true. And there's no magic formula for getting over that. You just kind of have to go through it to grow through it, right? You just have to push through it. Yeah.
Speaking of having kids, I don't have any. However, I work with many women who are mums. And as you mentioned, they do feel that stress around managing kids, but managing their own lives as well. and having PCOS. Like
Yes.
how does one woman manage all of that? Because that's a lot.
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. I wish I knew the answer. I don't know. I think it's giving yourself grace. And I think, I was talking to my mom about this with social media. Now we have so many people we can open our phone and compare ourselves to. And
Mm.
I think about some of the parenting the parenting accounts that I follow, like on Instagram, and like I always come back to this one because it was just so ridiculous to me. But it was like this reel and it was like viral, so it just popped up on my phone. I don't even follow them, but it was like this couple and they had toddler twin boys they looked to be about like 2, and the mom and dad were like taking our twin toddlers on a trip. And the reel goes through like flashes of different scenes, like they're in the airport, they're rolling their little luggage, they're on the plane, they're eating their snacks. And then the last scene of the reel is the mom and dad having a cocktail, and it's like time stamped at 5 p.m. And they had traveled internationally. So they had taken if anyone has a 2-year-old or has been through the twos, you know what I'm talking about. Like it is chaos all the time. And they have 2 of them. And I watched that reel thinking, oh my gosh, like I'm the worst mom ever when I travel with my kids. It is chaos, 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 tantrums everywhere. I mean, it's like can I cuss on here or no? Is that not a
Yes,
thing?
go for it.
Okay, shit show. Okay, so um watching the reel really it just made me feel so bad about myself as like a mom. And I was like, okay, what am I doing wrong? But then I had to remind myself, okay, no, like social media is just a highlight reel,
Yeah.
right? They did not include the tantrums on the airport floor, which we all have been there with kids, especially toddlers. Can't imagine with twins boys. So it's the same thing with PCOS and health. We have all of these accounts that we see. Like I love the ones that I see on social media that are like my morning routine, and it's like a cup of lemon water, and like that's awesome. And like I'm really happy for people that have that strong of a routine. Like that's what we aim for. But for those of us who can't have that morning routine, it makes us feel like we're inadequate, right? Like we're doing something wrong. So I don't think there's any, I know for a fact, actually, there's nobody who's 100% handling it all perfectly, right? We're all struggling in some capacity, but we're just not sharing that with each other. And there are social media accounts who do share it, that do it really well. And I so appreciate that. And I think those accounts always are blowing up faster, right? Because people are like, I relate to that. So anyways, end rant. But I just remember talking to my mom about that, and she goes, yeah, when I was raising you and your siblings, we didn't have that, right? Like all she could do was talk to her mom friends at the park about, what was happening. She didn't have these perfectly curated Instagram highlight reels or reel videos where that showed all the greatest parts of the trip. And then you feel like, oh, well, my trip was horrible. Like what happened? So I think there's a lot to be said in just giving ourselves grace and knowing that like we're all dealing just with life at full speed all the time. And the most we can do is the most we can do. And that's the best. That's the best we can do. So that's my best answer there. I wish there was a magic formula. I don't have it yet. And if I do, I'll make millions, but I don't have it now.
I admire that so much. And I think a lot of people need to be a little bit more open-minded around that, because like you said, your mum didn't have Instagram or Facebook back then. They didn't have this flora of information of what we have right now. But we also, as you mentioned, we have to be more mindful of what we're actually seeing, because just like you see a video of the toddlers and like the perfect traveling, it's like us other women who are trainers watching other trainers in the gym going, oh my God, they're perfectly lifting, a deadlift and I can't do this way. It's like that comparison comes in.
Yes, yes. And that quote, that comparison is the thief of joy, is so true. Now, not only are we trying to keep up with the Joneses next door, we've got 90 million Joneses on on our Instagram and TikTok feed. So it's a lot. It's a lot. I totally feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, speaking of comparison around PCOS, I find this sometimes with a lot of women who, yes, they have different types of PCOS, but I've
Mhm.
come across a lot of women who have fertility issues with having PCOS, but then you have the
Oh,
other
yeah.
women on the other spectrum who have PCOS, but have no
Mhm.
issues conceiving.
Right. Yes. And I think that adds to the complexity of this condition, right? There's a metabolic point or metabolic piece, there's a hormonal endocrine piece, there's a gynecological piece. And that's why doctors don't really know what to do with us. We're so displaced in the medical system. And yeah, if you're dealing with different symptoms, it can be really hard when you see someone with the same diagnosis who has a completely different set of issues, and they're not struggling with your particular issue, right? And then you're comparing yourself to people who are in your own tribe, and it's just very frustrating. I totally get that. I see that a lot. Yeah, yeah, I see that a lot. There's a lot of discussion in the program groups that I run. I get to see all these amazing conversations between women, and I get to add to them and answer questions, and it's so fantastic. But I do see a lot of that, like, oh, if someone will share a success, like, oh, I lost 10 pounds this month, so proud of myself, and then someone else comments, oh, well, I only lost one, like, what am I doing wrong? And it's like, well, wait a minute, how much weight did that person intend to lose overall? Because if that person is 400 pounds to start with and you're 150, you're going to go at a lot different pace. Your pace is going to be very different, right? So yeah, I see that all the time, and it's so hard, especially when we're all dealing with these like totally separate symptoms.
Yeah. Again, it like goes back to that comparison. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
And then
Mm-hmm.
it makes you feel as if you're not good enough or you're not working hard enough towards your goals because you're seeing other people succeeding a little bit, better in quotations.
Yeah, definitely. I know. And that's why I really try to share some of my own personal struggles because, because I have PCOS too, I have a unique perspective versus a doctor who's just, in and out in 10 minutes, or another provider who doesn't actually struggle with this condition. I know how hard it is, and I
Mhm.
know how frustrating it is. And I love to share that because it is so helpful for women with PCOS to not feel like they're alone. Even as common as it is, I barely know anybody in my personal life who also has PCOS. I feel like I barely know anyone. And yet it feels like it's so common, and there's this huge online world of women struggling. So, I think there's a combination of us not talking about it as much as we should. But yeah, I really try to normalize this condition, and shed light on some of the struggles and the frustrations. I feel like that's important. And that's
Mm.
part of my work, I feel like. Yeah.
It's so true. And I love that you mentioned that because that was going to literally be my next question going like, why do we feel that we have to hold ourselves back from speaking a truth or like speaking about our struggles to people?
Totally. I know. Well, I think there's I think there's a lot of shame in a condition like this. I think a lot of us feel like we're less feminine, or
Yeah.
like and this is totally, and we'll talk about this and we'll get to this, but like we're less of a woman if we don't have that regular perfect period, or we can't conceive, or we've been trying for a baby for 2 years and we've been unsuccessful, or we're growing hair where we don't want it and we're losing it where we do. There's so much shame in that because so much of I feel like our confidence comes from, and this goes back, I mean, forever and ever. And a lot of us for like when we're kids, but women, I think more so, I know more so than men, women are taught that our self-worth is tied to how we look.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of us also tie our self worth as we get older and as we get into the phase of life where we feel like we want to start a family, or maybe we know that we want to have that on the horizon, or in the near future as we get into that age, right? These are not things I was thinking about at 18, but they certainly were at 30, right? We're thinking about fertility, and we're attaching some of our self worth, and as women, to the ability to be able to bring life, right? To like create life. So I think there's just a lot of shame and guilt involved in a lot of the physical manifestations of PCOS, and a lot of that, that femininity and how we think of that, and how we tie that to certain areas of our health and our lives. So I think that's probably why. I know for myself, when I started my private practice and my Instagram page for women's health, it wasn't entirely PCOS focused. I wasn't ready to share that I had PCOS and that I struggled with it. I knew that friends followed me. I knew family followed me. I knew that my partner, my husband at the time, and his family followed me. And I felt embarrassed. And I didn't know how to share my story. And I think that's true for a lot of us, just like something, a topic like, and the pain and of loss, of miscarriage, right? Like that's so common, and we don't talk about it enough. And that further perpetuates the issue, but it's just something that I think a lot of us have to take a stand on and decide that, sharing this is actually really freeing.
Yeah.
And it opens doors. It doesn't close doors as much as we think. It opens them up. It opens the door to conversation, to connection, to meeting other women and other people who struggle with this. It opens more doors than it closes. And I hope that that's encouraging for anybody who struggles with their symptoms and who feels like, they are holding back from sharing. And I still feel that way sometimes. Don't get me wrong. I'm not this bear all the time. I still struggle with that a little bit too. But every year, and as I get older and I get more comfortable talking about it, I feel like I'm able to open up more freely, and it is really freeing. It feels really good. So yeah, if anyone's struggling with that, you're not alone. And the more comfortable you get and the more you are open to talking about these things, the better you will feel in the end. I promise you that.
It's so true. And I would love to ask you, what made you feel so confident by you sharing your truth with social media or with people? Because you mentioned you felt shame when it was around your family and friends.
That's a great question. I've never been asked that in my life. I think it was the fact that it was helpful. I think I always, always, always strive to be helpful. I never put out content on social media that doesn't have the purpose of either being inspiring, educational, or just entertaining. Right? Sometimes we just need to laugh, because if we laugh, then maybe we're not crying. Crying is important too, but right? Like sometimes we just need to laugh about it, man. So I never put out content that I don't think is going to be helpful in some way. And sharing my story, what I realized was actually so much more helpful than anything else, because women felt like they could relate. And they felt less alone. And that just warms my little heart, because I always want to support and empower women. And I that's my life's calling. And I feel like doing that, being vulnerable, is the best way that I could reach women and touch them in ways, that just talking about PCOS, just like clinically, like I could do that all day long. Sure. But I love to be vulnerable and share my own story, because it's so important to get that message out, to connect. So I think just building connection.
Yeah, 100%. And it's changing that narrative from being afraid to share your vulnerability, because I don't know about yourself, but for so many years, I used to get pushed down or told not to express my emotions. And that really held me back for so long to actually speak my truth, where now I've come to this era of my life. You know what? It's taken me years of work, but now I literally just post whatever, whenever I want up on social media. And I'm very vulnerable, and I share a lot with my followers. And it just shows you how relatable it is to so many women, whether it's through a miscarriage, whether it's through a breakup, whether it's, PCOS issues, like hair, there's so many things there. And it just shows you we're all in the same position.
Exactly. I know. That's so true. Yeah, it is really freeing. I 100% agree with you. Yes.
I love it. It's, I guess the more vulnerable we are, as you mentioned, the better connections we can have with more people in general.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. I used to do some business coaching for social media purposes. And I always, number one thing was be vulnerable. That's how people
Mhm.
relate to you. That's how you connect. And it's so true. I see accounts, on there. You can be the most beautiful woman in the room. And if you're talking about PCOS, if you're not relatable and you're not being vulnerable, nobody's going to connect. So yeah, share your story always.
100%. And speaking of stories, I would love to know what are some of your mistakes that you made over your time, like from, having PCOS or going through pregnancy or, having a family.
Yeah, many. My gosh. So for me, my PCOS is very tied to stress.
Yeah.
Very, very, very huge connection there. I've always known that about myself, since I understood my PCOS. So when I'm not actively focused on that, which like of course can get off track because life, I always notice it shows up. My PCOS starts to flare. And I always like to say, use your body as your barometer because your body will tell you that it wants a change and nothing will change if nothing changes, right? So you've got to take action and figure out what it needs and how to give that to it. So yeah, I think it's for me mostly just not focusing on stress and letting myself. I'm totally like a busy bee. I'm a workaholic type A. Like that's just how I've always been. And I know a lot of women with PCOS can describe themselves like that.
Yeah.
So it's very easy for me if I'm not, yes, if I'm not intentional, it's very easy for me to just like work late into the night and then wake up and keep working because I like love what I do. I'm so enthusiastic about it. Not a bad thing, but also burnout is very real. So I think it's just not focusing on the things that my body wants. It wants, adequate sleep. It wants a routine.
Mm.
It doesn't want to go, and as much as I love to travel, it doesn't love traveling as much as I love traveling. So it's just listening and kind of compromising. You're in a constant relationship with your PCOS and it's give and take, right? So it's about listening and responding when necessary. There are some dietary mistakes that I made before I really understood how to eat for my PCOS, and that looked like um, underdoing it on protein, kind of like you mentioned, and overdoing it on carbs. And I posted a reel about this recently, but it's not from my just professional experience and my professional opinion. And of course, it's not impossible, but it can be harder to manage PCOS when you're eating completely strictly vegan. I did that for many years, and it really wreaked havoc on my body just personally because of course there are better ways to go about this, but I really was only focused on avoiding all animal based things, and I wasn't understanding the carb intake that I was
Mm.
what I was doing carb wise. I was going crazy on carbs, way under doing protein and fats, and it was just a recipe for disaster. So if you are somebody that's plant-based, you really need to make sure that you're correctly carrying that out if you have PCOS, because it can be harder. It can be a little trickier. Not impossible, but it is harder because you do take in more carbs inevitably. If you're doing lots of beans and lentils and things like that. So just something to be mindful of. I definitely made that mistake early on as well. Over exercising, I've been through 2 bouts of hypothalamic amenorrhea, so HA, completely separate and on top of my PCOS. Good times, but I totally underfueled and overdid it in the exercise department. So I messed up there a lot. I lost my period for a long time before I understood what was going on. So yeah, I've definitely made my fair share of mistakes, but they're learning opportunities.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. Every mistake is a learning opportunity. And I think a lot of people need to realize that it's not a matter of you making a mistake and feeling like a failure. It's literally like that's life. We learn from our
Yes.
mistakes and we do better as we grow older.
Right? So true. Absolutely agree with that.
I love that. Cory, thank you so much for joining me today. I know a lot of
Yes.
the listeners are either taking notes or they're probably just going to go back and replay this episode because there's a lot of nuggets in today's podcast.
Awesome. I'm glad. I'm happy to hear that. And I hope it's helpful.
It definitely is. And before we head off, how can our listeners get in touch with you and how can they work with you if you are taking on clients?
Yeah, so I don't see clients one-on-one anymore, but I do have a brand new PCOS program, which I'm so excited about, that launches in mid-April, and I'm going to be releasing a lot more details soon on my Instagram account. I'm very active on there. I post every day pretty much, and that's the Women's Dietitian. And it is called the PCOS Thrive Hive, and it is all about PCOS symptom mastery. There are curated PCOS meal plans made by me. There are weekly exercise, downloadable videos that you can work out to with a PCOS fitness instructor. There are expert speaker panels. There's a full supplement protocol. There's cycle tracking, fertility, pregnancy, postpartum, if that's what you're looking for. And then there's a whole non-restrictive permanent weight loss component if that's something else that you're looking into. So it's very exciting, and I can't wait to release that.
I love that so much. Well, girls, stay tuned because mid-April that's coming out. It's the opportunity to join the PCOS club. But other than that, girls, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please make sure that you screenshot it, tag us at the Women's Fitness Academy, tag Cory, tag myself. And then till next time, take the opportunity where you can to heal your PCOS and your stress.